18 earthquakes, 12 hours, same location, over and over again. And the location, that is what makes this different. That is what makes this serious. The Juan de Fuca Ridge, sitting in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of the Pacific Northwest and directly connected, geologically, tectonically, physically connected to one of the most feared fault systems on the entire planet, the Cascadia Subduction Zone, the fault that scientists say is capable of producing a magnitude 9 plus earthquake. The fault that would send a devastating tsunami crashing into the coastlines of Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia within minutes. That fault, and right next door to it, the ground just shook 18 times in 12 hours. Further into this video, I will explain exactly what this swarm means, why the location matters so much, what the connection to Cascadia really is, and what scientists are watching right now. Stay with me, because this is the kind of event that deserves your full attention. So let me set this up properly, because I want you to understand exactly what happened here and where. The Juan de Fuca Ridge is an underwater mountain range, a mid-ocean ridge system, sitting on the floor of the Pacific Ocean approximately 200 to 500 kilometers, 125 to 310 miles off the coasts of Oregon, Washington State, and British Columbia in Canada. It runs roughly north to south, and it is the boundary between two tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate on the west and the Juan de Fuca Plate on the east. Now, the Juan de Fuca Plate, this is a relatively small tectonic plate, one of the smallest on Earth, a remnant of what was once a much larger plate system called the Farallon Plate. That ancient plate has largely been consumed by subduction over millions of years. What remains is the Juan de Fuca, small but critically important, because the Juan de Fuca Plate is actively subducting, diving eastward beneath the North American Plate, along the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and at the Juan de Fuca Ridge, that plate is being created. New seafloor, pulled apart, magma rising from the mantle below, filling the gap, solidifying, pushing the plates apart, and now 18 earthquakes in 12 hours along that ridge. The USGS and the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network detected this swarm, magnitudes ranging from around 2.5 to just over 4.0, shallow focal depths, concentrated along the axial zone of the ridge. That is the central rift valley where the seafloor spreading happens, where the plates pull apart, where magma intrudes. This swarm is consistent with what volcanologists and seismologists call a magmatic intrusion event or a rifting episode, meaning magma pushing into cracks in the seafloor, forcing the plates apart, creating earthquakes as the rock fractures, and I will explain why this matters so much for what happens further east, at the Cascadia Subduction Zone. But first, I want you to understand the full geography of what we are dealing with here. On the other side of the Juan de Fuca Plate, on its eastern edge, is the Cascadia Subduction Zone. This is where the Juan de Fuca Plate dives beneath North America, and this subduction zone stretches approximately 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles, from Northern California all the way up through Oregon and Washington and into southern British Columbia, directly offshore of some of the most populated coastlines in North America. Seattle, population 750,000 in the city proper, over 4 million in the greater metro area. Portland, over 2.5 million in the metro area. Vancouver, British Columbia, over 2.5 million people. Hundreds of smaller coastal communities in Oregon, Washington, and BC, sitting within the direct impact zone of what Cascadia is capable of. And what is Cascadia capable of? Let me tell you. The last full rupture of the Cascadia Subduction Zone occurred on January 26, 1700. We know the date precisely, not from seismic instruments, those did not exist then, but from Japanese historical records. A tsunami arrived on the coast of Japan on January 27, 1700, with no earthquake felt in Japan, meaning the earthquake that generated it was on the far side of the Pacific, combined with Native American oral traditions describing a great shaking and flooding, combined with tree ring data from ghost forests, stands of trees drowned when the coastline suddenly dropped during the rupture. Scientists have reconstructed reconstructed the 1700 Cascadia earthquake as a magnitude 9.0 event, possibly as large as magnitude 9.2. The tsunami it generated crossed the entire Pacific Ocean, and that was 325 years ago. The Cascadia Fault has been locked ever since, building stress every year, every decade, every century, building toward its next rupture. And here is the number that FEMA, the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, and the Washington Emergency Management Division all use in their planning documents. When the next full Cascadia rupture occurs, and scientists say it is not a question of if, it is a question of when. The shaking will last between 3 and 5 minutes. That is 3 to 5 minutes of continuous magnitude 9 level shaking. Infrastructure destruction on a scale the Pacific Northwest has never experienced. And then, 15 to 30 minutes later, tsunami waves will begin arriving on the Oregon and Washington coast. Waves potentially reaching 20 to 30 meters, 65 to 100 feet in some coastal areas. That is the scenario. That is what Cascadia is capable of. And right next door to this system, the ground just shook 18 times in 12 hours. Further in this video, I will explain exactly how those two things are connected. But first, I want you to think about the people who live with this reality every single day. The coastal communities of Oregon and Washington, the fishing towns, the beach communities, the ports, Astoria, Seaside, Cannon Beach, Newport, Florence. These are real towns with real people, and many of them live with what the scientists call the inundation zone, the zone that will be underwater when Cascadia ruptures. Some coastal Oregon towns have inundation maps where the tsunami line runs right through the middle of the community. One side of the road, high enough to survive. Other side, underwater within 20 minutes. I spoke with accounts from emergency planners in Cannon Beach, Oregon. One official described running tsunami evacuation drills with school children. She said the hardest part is explaining to a 7-year-old why they have to practice running uphill as fast as they can, because you cannot tell them exactly when they will need to do it for real, but you know they will need to. She said, "We do not know if it will happen in our lifetimes, but the geology does not care about our timelines. It operates on its own schedule." And when I heard that, it stayed with me, guys, because that is exactly right. The geology does not care about our timelines. The Cascadia Fault has been building stress for 325 years, and 18 earthquakes in 12 hours just rattled the plate that is feeding it. Guys, before we get into what this earthquake swarm actually means for the Cascadia system, can you do me a quick favor? Give this video a like and a hype. Share it with someone on the West Coast who needs to hear this. Leave a comment, especially if you are in Oregon, Washington, or British Columbia. I want to know if you felt anything. It costs you nothing. It helps this channel keep bringing you the information that matters. Okay, let's get into the science, because this is where it gets genuinely important. So, what is actually happening at the Juan de Fuca Ridge right now? And what does an earthquake swarm on a mid-ocean ridge mean for the subduction zone connected to it? Let me break this down step by step. The Juan de Fuca Ridge is a spreading center. That means the two plates on either side of it are being pulled apart. New oceanic crust is being generated continuously at this ridge. Magma wells up from the mantle, fills the gap, cools, becomes new seafloor, and pushes the Juan de Fuca plate eastward, away from the ridge, toward North America, toward the Cascadia Subduction Zone. This spreading process is not perfectly smooth. It is episodic. It happens in bursts. And those bursts, those episodes of magma intrusion and seafloor spreading, produce earthquake swarms, exactly like what we just saw. 18 earthquakes in 12 hours, concentrated along the axial rift zone of the ridge. This pattern, multiple small to moderate earthquakes clustered in space and time along a spreading center, is a classic signal of what scientists call a diking event. A diking event is when magma intrudes into a vertical crack in the crust, a dike. The magma forces the rock apart. The rock fractures in a series of earthquakes. The seafloor spreads, and the Juan de Fuca plate gets a push. Now here is the critical connection. If the Juan de Fuca plate gets a push at its western boundary at the spreading ridge, that push has to go somewhere. The plate is being generated at the ridge, and it is being consumed at the Cascadia Subduction Zone to the east. These two processes are linked. The rate of spreading at the ridge influences the rate of convergence at the subduction zone. And convergence rate, how fast the Juan de Fuca plate is pushing into and beneath North America, is directly related to how stress accumulates on the locked Cascadia fault. Now, does one earthquake swarm at the ridge suddenly change the stress state of the Cascadia fault dramatically? No. One swarm does not do that. Scientists are careful and precise about this. The timescales over which ridge spreading influences subduction zone behavior are typically long, thousands to tens of thousands of years in terms of plate motion rates. But here is what is important. Here is what I want you to take away. The Juan de Fuca Ridge and the Cascadia Subduction Zone are not separate independent systems. They are two ends of the same plate. Activity at one end is geologically relevant to what happens at the other end. And right now, we are seeing elevated seismic activity at the spreading end of a plate whose subduction end has been locked, accumulating stress for 325 years. And there is one more piece of this story that I found in the research that I think you absolutely need to hear. So I did a deep research dive into the history of seismic activity at the Juan de Fuca Ridge and its relationship to broader Pacific Northwest seismicity. And what I found connects this current swarm to a pattern that is genuinely worth understanding. The Juan de Fuca Ridge is not just seismically active, it is volcanically active. There are active submarine volcanoes along this ridge, the most studied of which is Axial Seamount. Axial Seamount is a submarine volcano sitting at the intersection of the Juan de Fuca Ridge and the Cobb-Eichelberg Seamount chain. It sits approximately 480 kilometers, 300 miles off the Oregon coast, at a depth of about 2,400 meters, 4,600 feet below the ocean's surface. An axial seamount has erupted 3 times in recent decades, and 2015. Each of those eruptions was preceded by exactly the kind of earthquake swarm we are now seeing, hundreds to thousands of small earthquakes, concentrated along the axial rift zone, consistent with magma intrusion at depth. Following the 2015 eruption, scientists at the Ocean Observatories Initiative, who have an extraordinary network of seafloor instruments directly on and around axial seamount, documented the seafloor dropping by over 2 meters, more than 6 feet, as the magma chamber deflated during the eruption and then slowly reinflating afterward. As magma refilled the chamber, as of the most recent monitoring data from the OOI network, axial seamount's magma chamber has been reinflating. Ground deformation measurements show the seafloor has risen to levels comparable to what was observed before the 2015 eruption. Scientists at the University of Washington and Oregon State University who monitor axial seamount have stated publicly in peer-reviewed research that axial seamount is one of the most predictable volcanoes on Earth, and that the reinflation of its magma chamber suggests another eruption is plausible in the coming years. Now, is the current earthquake swarm on the Juan de Fuca Ridge connected to axial seamount activity? That requires analysis of the precise locations and focal mechanisms of these 18 earthquakes, which monitoring agencies are doing right now. If the swarm is located along the rift zone near axial seamount, it could be a signal that the magmatic system beneath the seamount is becoming more active, approaching another eruptive episode, and a submarine eruption at axial seamount, while not directly threatening to cause a tsunami, would be scientifically extraordinary. It would confirm that the Juan de Fuca Ridge system is in an elevated period of magmatic activity, which has direct relevance to the broader tectonic picture of this entire region. There is also historical data that I found particularly significant. Research published in the Journal of Geophysical Research examining the relationship between Juan de Fuca Ridge seismicity and regional tectonic stress found that episodic spreading events at the ridge produce measurable changes in the stress field of the overlying North American plate. Small changes, but measurable. And in a system like Cascadia, where the fault is already at an advanced stage of its stress accumulation cycle, even small perturbations to the stress field are worth tracking. This is not theoretical. This is instrumented science being conducted right now. So why does all of this matter beyond the Pacific Northwest? Why should someone watching this in Europe or Asia or anywhere else care about 18 earthquakes on an underwater ridge off Oregon? Let me tell you exactly why. First, the Pacific Northwest is one of the most economically critical regions in North America. Seattle is home to Boeing's commercial aviation manufacturing, Microsoft, Amazon, major logistics hubs. The Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma are among the largest container ports on the West Coast, a Cascadia rupture scenario, which the USGS, FEMA, and the Oregon and Washington state emergency agencies have all modeled in detail, would cause infrastructure damage estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. FEMA's Cascadia Rising exercise in 2016 projected over 1 million people displaced. Infrastructure recovery timelines measured in years, not days, not weeks, years. Second, the tsunami generated by a full Cascadia rupture would not stay on the West Coast, just like the 1700 rupture sent a tsunami to Japan. A modern full Cascadia rupture would generate a transoceanic tsunami. Hawaii would receive waves within approximately 5 hours. Japan within approximately 10 hours. The entire Pacific Basin would be affected. This is a global event with global consequences. Third, the scientific uncertainty around Cascadia's rupture timing is significant, and that uncertainty itself is important information. Research published by Dr. Chris Goldfinger at Oregon State University, using offshore sediment core data to reconstruct the history of Cascadia ruptures, found that the southern section of the Cascadia Fault has a recurrence interval of roughly 240 years, and the last rupture was 325 years ago. The southern Cascadia section is statistically overdue. Let that sink in. Overdue. And the connection to Juan de Fuca Ridge activity, the connection to the plate that is driving Cascadia's stress accumulation, makes the current earthquake swarm genuinely relevant, not as a direct trigger, not as a countdown clock, but as a reminder that this system is active, that these plates are moving, that the geological processes driving Cascadia toward its next rupture are ongoing every single day. So what do we watch for from here? What are the monitoring agencies tracking? The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network and the USGS will be analyzing the precise locations and focal mechanisms of the 18 earthquakes. Are they concentrated at axial seamount or along a different section of the ridge? The Ocean Observatory's initiative seafloor instruments at axial seamount will be showing whether the swarm is accompanied by any accelerated ground deformation, any changes in hydrothermal vent temperatures, any changes in the inflation rate of the magma chamber. NOAA's DART buoy network, deep ocean assessment and reporting of tsunamis, sensors on the seafloor of the Pacific that measure pressure changes from tsunamis are continuously running. Any submarine eruption or major seafloor displacement would be detected within minutes. And on the Cascadia Fault itself, the Plate Boundary Observatory GPS network, measuring ground deformation along the Pacific Northwest coast, looking for any changes in the pattern of crustal motion, any signal of accelerated locking or unlocking on the fault interface. Right now, the Cascadia Fault appears to be in its normal locked state, accumulating stress as it has been for 325 years. The current Juan de Fuca Ridge swarm does not change that assessment, but it reminds us of the tectonic context. It reminds us that the Juan de Fuca plate is actively being generated at the ridge, actively subducting beneath North America at Cascadia, actively building the stress that will one day, on a geological schedule that does not consult our calendars, release. Guys, I hope this gave you the full picture of what is happening here, not just 18 dots on a seismic map, but the full geological story behind those dots: the Juan de Fuca Plate, the spreading ridge, the Cascadia Subduction Zone, the 1700 rupture, the re-inflating axial seamount, The overdue southern Cascadia section, the real human stakes for millions of people on the Pacific Northwest coast. This story connects to so much more. The ring of fire seismicity we have been covering, the submarine volcanic activity along mid-ocean ridges, the global picture of elevated tectonic activity right now. All of that is in the end screen. Go check it out. I have been tracking all of these connected events, and I will keep doing that because right now, the Pacific Northwest's geological clock is ticking. And the Juan de Fuca Ridge just reminded us of that. If you want to support the channel, you know how it works. I do not want to do a brand thing here. A coffee keeps this channel running, and if you are new here, subscribe, because the next update on this story could come at any time. Stay safe, guys. Be aware. Know what is happening beneath the ground you are standing on. Bye-bye.